Welcome to today's webcast. Today we're going to be talking about project management for planners and developers, and today I'm joined by Brad Wellstead from the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Cornell, your unique experience, because I think you bring some something interesting to this topic today. So tell me a little bit about your work, what you teach, and as it relates to today's topic.
Well, I started off life as an architect, and
You went to Cornell for architecture.
I did.
All right.
Yeah, many more years than I'd care to admit at the moment. But practiced architecture for about 10 years. The last 5 of which were in Hawaii, and I just worked on hotels and some tall buildings and things, but mostly the hotels. And I just got a real love of the whole hospitality world and the hotel world with the company I was working in. But there was a point where I figured out that I like architecture. I love design. I love being in that world. But I was working with guys that do a lot of project management as clients, and I said, that's the guy I want to be. So after 10 years, I went back to graduate school, hotel school, and basically to learn how to run a business, because they never teach you that in architecture school. With the dream of opening a full-service hospitality project management firm.
Okay. Where'd you go with that?
Well, we went to the Pacific Northwest, where there's no really significant hospitality organizations,
Right.
But we chose that as a lifestyle, which is critical. I love living in that area of the world, and so pivoted slightly and found my firm, and it was mostly for large institutions, higher ed, governments, counties, and so on, and hospitals. And we had a good 20-year run or so with a couple $1 billion worth of work, and we had 17 employees at one point, and really had a long legacy there of what we were doing. And then after 20 years, it was like, that's a long time.
Right.
And a position became available to teach at the hotel school.
Through
with
someone who you worked with early on,
it
a
was
professor of
my
yours.
former thesis advisor and professor, when
Got
I
it.
was
So
in
you came
grad
on board
school.
to Cornell, and
Yeah,
here you are teaching what you ended up doing.
yeah, I love it.
So in transitioning from architecture into project management and doing that again for about 20 years or something, are there particular characteristics or I don't know, maybe a mindset or a particular set of skills that might benefit a project manager? If you're getting started in this field, what are the particular skills and abilities that would benefit one most?
Well, I mean, the skills are one thing, and then there's the characteristics that you have as well. I mean, good project management skills include, understanding and getting your hand around scope of a project, and being able to schedule and budget and, build teams and so on. But then that works into the characteristics where, you as the leader of a project, it's about team building and significantly excellent communication skills. And you have to be a motivator, and you have to be a coacher. And even then, though, it includes things like negotiations. Like almost everything seems to be a negotiation.
It sounds like a lot of leadership skills as much as almost
True.
anything else, right?
Yeah, well, you're the leader of the project.
You're the leader of the project.
Right.
So when we kick off a project, what are some of the variables that you start thinking about? How do you get your head around this when you kick something off?
Well, when I started teaching this, it wasn't as organized as I am now. Even after 20 years, I mean, it was one of those things where it's fascinating. I have to admit that 20 years ago, I didn't even take a course in project management. It's one of these things I grew into, and I think a lot of people get that. So my goal has always been to bring some, opening up the black box of what's going on in a project and say, okay, what are the inner workings of this? And so I developed this framework in real estate development that I think they can share with
Perfect. Okay, good. Let's take a look at the graphics. So what are we looking at here?
And so this is a take on real estate development as a framework, and so in answering your question, it's like the trick is don't think of it as this huge project, but think of it as a series of phases and processes, and for that matter, in the end, smaller projects that all lead to the final project.
I had noted when I was reading it, what struck me is the bottom row there, which is there's a deliverable at every phase, which I think is kind of
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah, so it breaks into the 5 phases. You see there: concept, definition, planning, implementation, and completion. But then below those phases are subphases, and then the actual tasks and activities that contribute to what is necessary to accomplish that phase. And you noted, yeah, you're correct. There's a deliverables at the very bottom. And the cool thing is that each of those columns is like its own project.
Yes.
And it has this termination point that then kicks off the next column. So you can sort of say, well, it keeps moving along here. And I mean, some people, the early parts of the phase, the concept phase, is very chaotic. It's a good title for this discussion.
Yeah, order out of chaos, right.
And there's a style, or not a style, but a technique of project management called agile project, which is basically putting people in a room and working hard at some objective and hoping something cool and innovative comes out of it.
That's right. And then iterating upon that.
Yeah, and then iterating upon that.
Yeah.
And there's a point with real estate development where it's very much the same idea, where you have a site, you have a concept, you have a location, you have a type of project or real estate that you want to develop, and you're molding all these different factors into this very kind of maelstrom of ideas. But as it starts to form, then from a project management point of view, it transforms into the waterfall method, which is more of a procedural, process-driven thing, which is how this framework is more laid out.
Right.
And so it's you do this, and then you can do this, and you can do this, because you start getting ahead of yourselves, and or behind, or you start doing things out of order. Then things start to get a little crazy.
And this is a living document. You've been working with this for a bit.
Yeah, it's been a good 5 years of evolution to get there.
Did I tell you that there's a live audience here today? I forgot to acknowledge the audience in that they can contribute your questions in the chat window. If you haven't gotten that going yet, it's right up here in the top right of your screen. You should see a little a thought bubble or a speech bubble there. Click that, and you can enter your questions. I will be receiving them on this iPad here. And I think invariably, pardon me, some people in attendance today are going to wonder if they can actually access that. Can we share that with them?
Of course.
Great. So at the end of this presentation, I'll share my email with you, and you can just simply shoot me an email, and I'll kick this document over to you. I have no way to share it in the chat live as it is. But so do you want to talk a little bit about anything more about this particular? I mean, there's another way that it's represented in the classic Gantt chart, but I don't want to skip to it unless you want to.
No, I mean, it brings order to the process. Actually, the top row there you see is almost a flowchart type of formatting that, bring those little round bubbles there are kind of like the verbs that lead you from one to the next step.
Yes.
And so you can look at this in multidimensional type of way, and it starts with a vision. It identifies all of the major aspects of a project in the lower half of the second column. And then it moves on into how you determine the feasibility and get the financing for a project. And once that's in place, then you get the idea of permission, basically. It's called entitlements to build the project in the municipality that you've identified. And you spend that middle blue column, planning about it and understanding what's coming up. And once that's all sort of wrapped up, then you're in just kind of implementation or execution mode, if you will, where you design and build the project and plan to get it operational and open for the public.
I would think with, thinking about all the different parties involved, obviously the project manager owns the project, but there's a lot of reporting. There's a lot of people that are involved. Is that component built into this? That I would presume by the time you're deep into it, you've got a lot of numbers, you've got a budget, you've got a schedule, you've got a lot of variables that are handled. But reporting is probably a big deal. Any advice on how that goes through a project? You had spoken about the agile component, right?
Sure.
Putting the people in a room and getting it going, but how do you like to deal with the reporting component? I'm just curious.
Well, it depends on who the project sponsor is typically. So the project manager can be that person, or
Yeah.
they typically are working with or for that the sponsor, the developer or the owner of the project itself. And it's really up to a discussion between those two entities to decide, okay, how is it that you want me to be reporting to? Everybody has their own ways of wanting to receive and get information. And so, is it, you want daily updates? Do you want to meet every week? Do you want to shoot you emails? Do you want a text every now and then? It really, everyone has their whole level of hands-onness,
Yeah.
which, really in the end becomes a part of how you manage the project, because that hands-onness can impact how the project proceeds. And so there's this, who has the decision powers and so on? How do you delegate those?
As a project manager, how do you account for unforeseen variables, or to what degree is flexibility built into the design? Yeah, I mean, you're executing on a project. You want it to go perfectly in your mind, right? You've got a projected outcome.
One of the goals of the project manager is, the best example I've heard, or a description I've heard of it, is that you want it to go smooth and steady. So smooth meaning that, things are moving along without a whole lot of bumps and grind, things happening.
A lot of
along.
surprises, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But steady also means, a constant forward motion, towards the completion of the project. So in the over 100 projects I've worked on in my career, I can count on maybe 4 that were that smooth and steady.
Okay, right. Yeah, I wouldn't
And
imagine that
it's
many
not a,
do it that way.
you shoot for that, but it's one of those things where what helps it become smooth and steady is accepting the fact that stuff's going to happen one way or the other, and you don't know really what it is. And so a lot of what I have learned and put together in talking and understanding it even more so as I teach it now is adequate planning for those, realistically, the unknown unknowns that are going to come back and hit you upside the back of the head.
Right.
I've had things where, how do you address, when somebody starts working on a water line at 7 a.m. in the morning and you show up at 7:15 and there's a 30-foot geyser of water in the air, a backhoe turned sideways in the street blocking traffic.
Worst case
and,
nightmares.
you're
Right.
like, nobody's around because the guy rabbited, and you're like, wow, wait. Those
Yeah.
kinds of things to, last minute changes of scope or schedule or budget. The day before groundbreaking, for example.
Yeah.
And, so these are the things that you plan for in some form or another, but it allows you, and having planned for them both in time and in dollars, for these kinds of contingencies, that you can execute it in a very graceful and elegant manner then.
Ideally. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about budget creation, seems like it would be a particular challenge. Any advice on how to deal with that, or what in your experience often happens with budget? Do you go conservative? How do you deal with that?
Oh, yeah, well, always conservative.
Right. Right.
I mean, aggressive never helps anyone really,
Right.
all the way through the whole project.
Yeah.
Real estate development is interesting because there's usually one team that comes up with how much money we have to spend on a project, and then it's handed over to the group that has to actually execute the project, and they're saying, okay, here's your budget and your scope, and oh, by the way, a schedule, and make sure it happens in all those conditions. And there's that handover, that nexus right there is always a challenging one sometimes, particularly if there were any last minute changes based on feasibility or needs of the project or so on. That gets smoothed over by having the involvement of a project manager who is running it throughout the entire project.
Right.
So when in fact you are creating budgets, they are able to contribute and add in the necessary factors of contingency, both time and money, to incorporate those so that they're in as part of it from the very beginning. Budgets are, very rough in the beginning. It's,
Yeah.
it's 90,000 square foot building, and it's $200 a foot. It's $18 million building.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm doing my math right.
Yeah.
And so it's just this $200 square foot thing. But then there's all these soft costs and, to cover for the fees. And then there's all the costs of what might be going on inside the building and purchasing the land and so on. So, you start with that kind of a framework, and it gets more and more detailed as the project moves along. And you try to keep, you can wheedle down the level of conservatism as more things get decided.
Right. Especially if you're ahead of schedule and so on.
Hopefully, yeah.
I have a question from Lennart. Do you use a management information system to track the development process? Any advice on that? We're getting technical.
Yeah,
right
that's
out of the gate,
cool. It's from a leadership role of project management. I mean, the management systems are great to provide a convenient means of communication of documents and all the things that you want to share on the project.
Right. Contracts and so on.
Yeah, contracts, schedules, budgets, requests for information, updates to any number of things. And they can be very helpful in that manner because it can ensure that as it's set up correctly, that all the people who need to know about something can know about it. And that's great. I think, as the digital age becomes more and more prevalent in the things that we do every day, that there seems to be this, I don't know, I won't call it a vision, maybe more of a fantasy, that there's a program that will manage it for you.
Right.
And it doesn't. And I don't know, construction is not, at least in our lifetimes right now, I don't foresee it becoming something so automated that it's going to become, the leadership role is going to go away.
No.
And
right.
so all those qualities I talked about earlier on,
Yes.
those can't be supplanted by a program. And they can be enhanced through the communication aspects of
Yes.
it. And the reporting aspects is another way. But some of those programs, and frankly, I find sometimes you become a slave to these things. You must
been through that.
Input this type thing every day and so on and so forth, which is good for monitoring and so on, depending on the size and complexity of the project. But at some point, there's just get out and walk around and talk to people and see what's going on.
That's right. Yeah, there's no miracle software.
It's not just looking at spreadsheets.
Yeah, so that leadership component will never go away. I mean,
as I see it now, no.
I doubt that it would ever happen. When you, how do you assess for potential?
Good question, by the way.
Yeah, that was a very good one. Keep them coming, by the way.
Yeah.
Where were we? We were talking about potential risks in a project. How do you account for them? How do you even begin thinking about that stuff? Let's say you're kind of new to this, which I imagine to a certain degree some of this audience is.
Right. So risk. I call it impact management more than risks, even though there's kind of a risks and opportunities to a project.
Yes.
So in the overall, it's impacts. I look at it as kind of two big phases. Early in the project, if you think about that real estate framework chart, the development chart, part of creating that development package, which was which is the deliverable at the bottom of the second column. There's a point there where you look at the impacts of the project, and you bring for lack of a better word, the project team together, the executives, the people who know what's going on, and you have a brainstorming session. You say, well, what are the things that are could happen here? And this is not about contingency. This is about really identifying the impacts of the project. And there's, what's the community up to? What's the development? Are they pro-development and a-development? What's the
regulatory constraints?
Exactly.
Have
Municipality.
Very good advice as far as it relates to that.
Oh, absolutely. And so how is it going to work through the entitlements and approvals process or the building department? What kind of construction climate are you in? Is it super white hot or is it, slow? All of these things contribute to the impacts to the project overall. And so you identify those early on, and then you absorb them into the project. You say, okay, if we're going to have issues with our entitlements, like it's going to take a long time, but we feel it's still going to be successful. Make sure you have built enough time in for that to happen. Don't expect it to happen quickly. Be realistic on it. Make sure if it's a white-hot construction climate, you've increased the budget, because clearly contractors will increase their prices, and subcontractors and so on will do the same thing. And, materials may be less available because of it. All of those things then contribute to what you should have incorporated into the project. Then, as you move further along into the project, things start to formulate, the financing's in place and so on, getting in place. Then you start thinking about, okay, what those contingencies, like the unknown unknowns, I call them the residuals of the project, of that thing. And so you get that same group together and you say, all right, how much contingency should we incorporate into our construction budget, and how we manage it? And there's no magic bullet for how that happens. There's opinions about it. So
what kind of contingencies?
Some of the things I talked about, but materials don't show up, or some materials aren't available, so you have to purchase them differently.
Union electricians on strike, or
somebody goes on strike, and
Yes.
that'll come around and hit you, and so that's going to add to your schedule potentially.
Sure.
Or just addressing and dealing with it.
Yes.
We're currently in an economic situation and construction situation where you can't even find workers. And so how do you, you transfer.
Nationally? Is that really
Oh, yeah. It's
nationally
across
that's
the
the case?
country in many cases. It's,
Okay.
there's a lot of construction going on. It's actually one of the biggest impacts to the industry we've got right now, which is the average age of the construction workers is, pushing 50, if not a little slightly higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's not a lot coming back in under, backfilling as younger people coming into it. And, there's this whole new type of insurance where you transfer that risk. If you don't get an apartment building open in time for here,
Right.
before school, you can buy this insurance that will cover the cost of hotel stays for these apartment-less tenants who can't move in yet because you couldn't finish your project.
Wow. What's that called?
I'm not even sure. I have to do more research on it. It's,
Sounds awful. Hopefully
vacancy insurance or something.
Yeah, right.
It's a whole new world with that kind of thing. And so this is how you deal with some of the impacts to the project. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question from Leonard. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Selecting project partners is obviously important. What key characteristics or traits are important to you when selecting project partners?
Oh, wow.
Partnership.
No,
The
that's
whole
good.
thing is a partnership, but what do you look for?
I look for, I'm struggling, I have this thing that I teach about called the 7 C's, but I'm probably not going to remember all 7 without a prompt. But, it's first and foremost is, are they capable and are they credible? Do they have the capacity, so there's 3 of the C's,
Yeah.
currently to accomplish the project as you're looking for? And do you have confidence in them? So, can you, either you've worked with them before or you're working with them new, and so then you have a process by which you check references and ensure that, you're getting that they're saying they are. You look also for, what kind of contract are they used to working with and so on. And then the contingency, are they covered with the types of insurance that is appropriate to have either for design professionals or contracting professionals. But, even in the overall, you want somebody or a entity who you feel you can work with and that is going to be a partner that is next to you, shoulder to shoulder, and when the inevitable issues come up, that you have somebody that's going to be a problem solver with you and not just look at you and say, okay, now what do I do? You'd rather have them look at you and say, here's 3 options we can talk about.
That's right.
And that's the kind of partner you want.
I should encourage, here we go. Ted, Question comes in. How do you handle when change orders exceed funding and threaten a project stoppage?
Change orders exceed funding. Wow. Well, that goes to the part that I guess it depends on the nature of the change orders, but
Yeah. What would be an example?
well, there's two times. Change orders come from a variety of areas. I mean, these are that's dealing with the contingencies, but there's also the owners tend to want to spend that contingency funds, and they say, let's change the scope, add this new thing in, or change this material,
Right.
or what if we do this? And these are all good things as long as it's reasonable, and you can have a discussion point that says, let's not do this to the extent that we exceed our budgets.
Right.
It's kind of like, I use the golf analogy, sort of like, teach me how to get out of the bunker, but it's actually better to say, teach me how not to get into the bunker. And so, if and I don't want to be glib about this answer, because it is a difficult situation that projects do get into. It's trying to find, remember we talked about those impacts early on, finding those impacts early on and absorbing them to the project, then all of a sudden those things don't become change orders later, is the hope that you're trying to avert that situation.
That's right.
So, and then having an adequate, not overly crazy, but an adequate contingency funds and time to address the things that you didn't know were going to happen. And, sadly, if the project funding is not adequate, then there's hard decisions that have to be made then.
And a lot of hard lessons learned.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've
Exactly.
had several. Ted talk. Here's another Ted question. Oh wait, I'm sorry. That one. Victor chatted in response to Leonard's last piece. Reputation obviously falls into how do you choose partners that are going to work best for you.
No question about it. Yeah.
Okay, let me talk to you a little bit about when you teach this stuff. What is it that you teach? Again, aspiring project managers. But what is it that gets you the most jazzed about teaching this, or what kind of what do you like to see in students besides the projected outcomes of becoming a project manager?
Well, I go about it in sort of a two-pronged approach. One is teaching the skills that you need to know about being a project manager.
Sure.
And so, understanding scope and budgeting and scheduling are the big three, and quality, and then supporting that, building teams and how you communicate with teams. And, we even talk about ethics and so on to the extent of, because sometimes you're confronted with ethical dilemmas.
Let me ask you about that.
Okay.
How does that figure into things? I mean, real estate development, right? There's a lot of ethical things to consider. What considerations do you get people thinking about? What kind of ethics are we talking about?
I mean, probably a lot of people's minds go to like, you're getting bribes or things like that. Or,
Yep.
Interesting. I've never been in a situation where that's an issue.
Living in New York.
New York or even in the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
But clearly it happens. I'm sure, I know it happens. So,
Yep.
I can't really address that head on. But to the extent of ethics and reputation, and particularly of the leader of the project, and what is their hallmark? I mean, their history of working with teams and everything is, did they manage that project openly? Did they manage it in a fair and good manner? Mm-hmm. So I look at it more from a point of view of fairness, and that when it when the hard decisions do come out, that you try to minimize the impact to one party, but whereas you try to spread it out and say, okay, maybe not both people are happy here, but we're doing it fairly.
Yeah, got it.
And
you can grab us some water.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah, I think I got you on that one. That was I'm glad I asked it. Lennart chimes back in. We've got a project management literate audience here, so it's cool.
Yeah.
When working on the capital stack, how important is it that investors and lenders are excited about the vision of the project? How much time do you spend on this versus the financial side when doing fundraising? Vision is everything, at least to get started.
I mean, realistically, when you're financing the project, you're
Yep.
still selling an idea.
Yep.
And so the capability of selling that vision is everything. And from a project management point of view, the most important thing is that the project manager understands that vision, because at that point, the person that was selling the vision is going away onto their next project or
Yes.
next projects.
Yep.
And has left it in the capable hands of the project manager, hopefully, who, the way I like to put it, has to steward that vision. And every single decision and thing that happens subsequently needs to get filtered through that vision, because people are always full of ideas, right? They're always saying,
No shortage
"Hey,
of
what
those,
about
yeah.
this? Let's look at it this way." And so on. And say, "Well, wait, does it go through that vision right? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it does." Or, "No, well, you know what? Great idea, but maybe we need to put that one aside for this time." So how, and lenders and investors, they have different motivations as they walk into this or become part of it, level of conservatism, looking at ROI for the investors. And so you have to be versatile in terms of how you present these things. It can't be presented exactly the same. I don't think it's on one hand, you're trying to make a lender comfortable with their underwriting of the project. On the other hand, with an investor, they're like, I want to get my money back and some.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I want to get back into. I don't want to dwell too much on the tech and tools, but for somebody that's learning this stuff, what are the fundamentals? You had presented your own your workflow, the Gantt chart, and so on. What other technology or tools or things that people need to be familiar with? Language terminologies. How do you where do you go for some of that stuff? Let's say you're just working on this independently.
Well, let's see.
Any books to read? any
There's no shortage of books, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
right.
I have one of the best collections of project management literature out there, I imagine,
All right.
at this point.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many, fall along the same exact kinds of lines and things.
Okay. Yeah.
There's really, I rarely see new ideas that change my mind about how I approach things.
I see.
All that much.
Right.
I mean, certainly there's ways of looking at it that, fine tune it and help you understand it. We talked about schedules, and
Yeah.
For me, interestingly enough, in my entire career, I've used some products that help schedule, but in the end, I just used Excel,
Yeah.
a spreadsheet, and
Very
build
powerful. Yep.
simple Gantt charts. Because remember, you are leading the project. You're not the one doing all of that work.
Yes.
And probably one of the best leadership capabilities that you have in scheduling. Oh, I see. Yeah. So here's this Gantt chart, for example, shows this actually takes that real estate framework, all the different aspects of it, and runs it through a 4-year fictional project. And the kind of the periods of time and how the relationships work and so on and so forth. This is all done in Excel.
Yes.
And your job as project manager is to communicate that.
Yes.
But when you talk to an architect or a contractor, some of the bigger contributors to the project, I don't tell them how to do it.
Yeah.
You say, look, our goal here is we need to get the design done in 10 months. That's what we're looking at. And you own that 10 months. Come back to me with a schedule. Show me how you're going to get it done. Maybe you can get it done sooner, or maybe not. But the fact is they get to own that schedule. I don't have to tell them how to do it, because the how is their deal. Similar with the contractor. You never
Yeah.
want to be in there telling them how to do their job. Holy mackerel.
Sure. Of course. Or what tools to use for that matter. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that, budgeting is the same thing. It's just, it's deeper and more sophisticated Excel workbooks. Breaking the project into different parts and then tracking it from the budget to what have you committed contractually to what's left over and what do you anticipate the remaining to be spent on this thing. And I really focus on trying to always have a real-time notion of the budget and the funds that are remaining, so that you don't make commitments past the level funds that are available. Because when contingencies happens, or when the owner says, "Hey, let's change all these sinks to Italian granite," okay, fine. Well, that's $250,000 change.
Yes.
How much do we have? Well, you've only spent, we've only written checks for, you've got $5 million left. Well, they say, yeah, but we've got committed of that $5 million you think is left, we've committed $475,000 of it to other potential contracts, or actually contracts that just haven't started yet and we haven't paid.
Yeah.
So, to that one question back there, that's probably where some of those change orders go past the funds, tracking the real-time funds available, which means the commitments are part of that, needs to be, that's a huge issue.
Do people have expectation of just having this stuff kind of presentable in real? I would imagine when you have large projects, people want to just check in and see how it's going, and this is when you're involving stakeholders and so on. What are the expectations as far as presenting, the state of the project, real-time metrics and so on?
Sure.
Costs?
When you're in the implementation stage, when you're spending 60-70% of your overall budget, design fees and construction, that's when the real money is getting spent. And so, there should be often weekly meetings between the owner and the architect during the design phase, and the project manager, of course.
Sure.
So that keeps them up to date, or the project manager keeps the owner up to date on a weekly basis that way. As you move into construction, typically weekly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings of the owner, architect, and contractor, and again with the project manager representing the owner. So that keeps everybody up to date what's going on. And again, depending on the owner, it's either a report back from that meeting, or I've been in situations where, like with a university, for example, you create a dashboard type situation, report that they can see on a monthly basis, so that they can see, okay, where are we at in our budget, how are we doing on schedule, are we ahead or behind, same with the budget, here's some of the things that happened over the last 30 days, here's things coming up over the next 30 days, and here's some of the issues that you and I or we need to talk about.
Sure.
And, or that you need to be aware of that may be coming up in the near future, so that we need to be start thinking about it.
I have a cost-focused question. Before getting into heavy detail of construction costs, do you know of a good resource for rule of thumb construction costs? Also, rule of thumb timeline for different stages. So we're talking about not necessarily
two different things there, but
two-part question, I suppose.
Yeah. In the more sophisticated projects, there's services like RS Means, and there's Dodge reports and so on that you can subscribe to. They're not cheap, I don't think, but they're generally available.
What do they do for you?
Well, so they break the project into different parts and pieces, and they also have different levels of detail. Depending on they'll break it up and say, okay, if you're doing a 5-story medical office building, what can you anticipate? If you're doing an 8-story apartment building, what can you anticipate on a dollars per square foot basis? Some of the best information, though, because it can be very affected regionally.
Yes.
From one place to another. If you're in New York City versus in, somewhere in the middle of America, it's like very different construction costs.
Yeah.
It can range. It can be twice as much from one to the other.
Sure.
Finding information from the local contractors or professionals, architects, and just having discussions with them, and try to have open, honest conversations. Because sometimes people are saying, well, they give you a lower dollars per square foot, hoping that you'll think that they can do it for that much. But it's when you're talking to, say, for contractors, but you want to poll 3 different contractors and say, where are you at in terms of 5-story steel steel framed office buildings with brick veneers.
Yeah.
So we're 180 a foot or 195 a foot. So you can get a sense of what's really going on in that particular location. Mm-hmm. Your other strategy too is to engage a cost planner, which can be very helpful because they are a third-party consultant that has no skin in the game other than giving you the best answer that you can find. Mm-hmm. And so you pay them, like a consultant, and in more complex projects, they're on your side of the table and can help hold the contractor's feet to the fire and can help make decisions even during the design process. Yeah. When the architect is making decisions, and frankly, some architects, they don't consider the cost implications of certain decisions. Mm-hmm. And, I've been there. I am one. I are one. Right. And, I'm more interested in making it be a beautiful building sometimes. Yeah. But to help stay in budget, having a professional who's looking over their shoulder and saying, if you used the maple baseboards instead of the stainless steel baseboards, that's a real story, by the way. Uh-huh. You could save $250,000.
Yeah, right.
Like, good idea.
Yeah. So the cost planner is right.
Yeah. So that's one of those things. Yeah, that's one of those ones when it goes to bid, and you're like, wait, where did the stainless steel come from? Why are we paying for that?
Yeah, exactly. And the cost planner presumably is someone who has that regional wisdom and data.
Absolutely.
Right. Which is
that's their job. They keep track of all that stuff. That I was advocating you do it on your own. Yeah. Or have somebody who does it every day help you out with it.
What percentage of cost projects that you've been involved in have you been working with a cost planner? Is it a matter of scale? Because you had kind of mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean it's they charge like any consultant.
Yeah.
$150, $200 an hour kind of thing. So
sure, right.
Depending on your scope, how much you want to do that.
Got it.
My apologies to those out there who are charging $300.
That's right. You devalued a whole bunch of workers.
Good on you.
Yeah.
But what percentage? It's really more. I think I would tend to use them more in the more complex projects.
Okay, there you go.
And ones where I knew it would be helpful throughout the entire implementation phase. Mm-hmm. To have them, as a partner in the project. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I've got a couple technicals to address. Yes, the Gantt chart will be available. So, Connie, if you could share my email in the chat. Anybody that wants to obtain either of these documents, I think they're really useful and really something to look at. Shoot me an email, and I will kick those over to you after we're done. Of course, this recording will be available to anyone that registered, so you'll be able to watch this in perpetuity. After we're done, I'll provide a quick edit, and there you go. Another thing I wanted to mention is that this presentation, you are offered continuing education unit credits if you pass a quiz after class. So after we're through, you'll be able to earn 0.1 CEUs from Cornell University, a 4-question quiz, not too rigorous. I think if you've paid any attention, you should do okay. So there's that. So stick around after class and return to the Adobe Connect window, and we'll be able to get that going for you. I want to ask you a little bit about your course. So as you know, eCornell is in the business of online education. As it turns out, Brad created a course, authored a course called Managing Real Estate Development Projects. What do you know, the thing we're talking about today. Tell us a little bit about the course, Connie's going to share the URL with the audience on that one too, but tell me what somebody might get out of that course as it relates to what we've been discussing today.
It touches on most of what we just have been talking about.
Yeah.
It starts with, the understanding of the project.
Yeah.
And getting your arms around it, the skills of creating a schedule and a budget, and running through the whole impact management point of view, mm-hmm. With some, I don't want to call them detours, but yep. We talk about creating RFPs and team building and such. Uh-huh. Also, an interesting part of it is that early on, I've also developed a thing that I call a project culture, which establishes sort of the DNA of the project. Is it on a really tight schedule or is it on a tight budget? Usually it's one or the other. Sometimes they try to do both. But usually one wins out over the other. So it starts to describe how you're going to manage this project. Are you keeping, where are you focusing? It's not so much resources, but it's where are you focusing the filters that you run through as things happen? And are you saying, I need to make decisions that are more focused on the schedule, or I need to make decisions that are more focused on not spending additional funds? And all in mind, keeping the quality of the scope and the scope together in that.
Yeah, right.
I've never once, even though they say that the troika or the triad of project management is scope, schedule, budget, right? And quality, schedule, and budget. And I've never had an owner say, you know what, scope and schedule are the critical thing. I don't care about quality.
Right.
Give me a bad project. It's fine.
Yeah, that's right.
No, never happened. So,
Right.
it's always come more down to to schedule and budget.
Yeah.
Then there's this whole other part of that culture that, we talk about in the course where it's like, and analyzes who the leaderships are and, and some of the things we talked about when we were talking about contingency, because it leads to understanding how you address contingencies. Is it white hot construction? Is it, a crazy municipality? Is it a community that's going to be anti or for development? Is it a difficult site, to work in? And a whole lot of either both, internal things that are happening as well as external things that can be happening, so that it gives you this really sort of comprehensive, holistic view of the project that once having done that, you have a sense of how you're going to move forward. So all of that pulls all that together. So those are the main things: the culture, schedule, budget, and the team building, and then the impact management aspects.
Listen, thank you very much for talking to me about this today. I want to thank the audience for joining us and for the excellent questions, the ones that we did get. For all of you, again, who are interested in Brad's course, of course, click the URL and definitely have a look at that. It certainly outlines everything you can hope to learn today. I appreciate this. I learned a lot certainly about project management itself, but some of the intangibles, the leadership qualities, some of the wisdom that comes with some of the work that you've done. So I appreciate you imparting that to the audience today.
It's been my pleasure to be here.
Perfect. If any of you need any follow-up information at all, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, and I will hopefully help you out. So thanks, and for those of you who are interested in taking the quiz, please stick around after class, and I will get that going in the Connect window in just a minute. Thanks all for joining us. We'll see you at the next webcast. Thank you so much.